What if Jesus is actually already way ahead of us? This week we celebrate Easter, and over in the story of the first Easter, Jesus was way ahead of everyone. We celebrate his resurrection. We celebrate new life because of him, and this is the core of our faith. In fact, it's the story written over and over in the lives of believers. Resurrection was not just a one-time thing. Resurrection is a story he writes in our lives over and over. So all of us believers, we come and celebrate all the things he's brought back to life in us, and we count on him for all the stories in the middle. And for everyone else, look with curiosity. Jesus has good in mind, and he's way ahead of you. You can download the notes to follow along with what we're doing here. We are celebrating Easter. Well, it's good to be together. However you find yourself here, however you made your way here, sitting very snugly together with everybody today, kind of a gift. It's good to be together. Listen, I just want to acknowledge, like many others, that some of you have found your way here because you've seen Jesus do amazing things in your life. And there's no better day to celebrate than Easter, that God turns our life right side up. But I also just want to say there's probably a lot of folks who just really love people like that, and you're willing to sit even in a place like this with those people. And there's a place for you. You can belong way before you believe. We are a bunch of imperfect people who have just found that Jesus meets us in every moment and helps us forward. The more we say yes to him, the more we point our life toward him, things always get better. Not always easier. Life just isn't easy. Can I get an Sometimes it's like real hard. And that doesn't change. But who is with us in it and what it means and how it matters changes dramatically when we point our lives toward Jesus. And that's what we're finding, and we invite you to come along with us. Whichever group you're in, here's all I want to say to us today on Easter is Jesus is way ahead of you. Like, he's way ahead of you. If you're playing checkers, he's playing chess, or whatever is like 5 steps beyond chess. I don't mean he's distant. I don't mean he's far beyond you, like tapping his foot, waiting for you to catch up. That's not what I mean at all. It's not geography we're talking about. I'm talking about his thinking, his scheming, his planning, his desire for each one of us is so good and is so far beyond. In fact, he is so strong and so good that even in the most challenging, heartbreaking, like gut-wrenching decisions that find their way into our life, the seasons that feel insurmountable and unsurvivable, he's so strong, he can even make good come from those things. He is way ahead of you. Tell somebody, way ahead. Way ahead. Now listen, sometimes people being ahead of you is not a good thing. You know what I'm saying? Like when you show up in the grocery line and there's like 47 people who did like this month's grocery shopping that day, not good the people ahead of you. At the DMV, anybody been to the DMV? Moment of silence for the DMV. I'm just saying, you don't even know where you are in line in that thing, right? I don't know how they figure that out. They're killing it. They're doing their best they can along the way. A friend of mine was talking about trying to buy Taylor Swift tickets and found out that while they were online just looking for the privilege to purchase something, they were like number 11,347. Sometimes it's not good that people are ahead of you. But sometimes it is, like when your friend is also trying to buy tickets and you've agreed to both jump on and they're number 38. That's a good situation, right? Now you're real glad somebody's ahead of you. Or when you roll into a new town, you're looking for somewhere to eat, you are so glad that 450 people went to that restaurant before you to tell you that on their best day, it's 2.5 stars. You know what I'm saying? Save you some trouble. That's all I'm saying. Or you find a mentor in life who has endured some things and seen some things. I was just talking with a friend right over here earlier today who has gone through some real heartbreak and challenge in life, and now their friends are enduring a very similar situation. While you never want to go through that, it's really great that someone has gone ahead of you to be able to like see things that you haven't seen, experience things that you haven't experienced. Sometimes it's really great. Or I was talking with a new mom earlier. How great was it, first-time moms, when there was a new mom ahead of you to kind of help point the way and like calm some fears and do just a little bit of coaching. It was so important in our family. Listen, sometimes it's really great that someone's ahead of you. And I just want to tell you, Jesus is way ahead of you. Tell somebody, way ahead. If you got a Bible with you, go to Mark chapter 16. I just want to show you in the resurrection story just one little window about how far ahead he is working for our good. That we can be a people full of hope, which literally just means a confident expectation of good. Not like a wish, not like a prayer, not like a maybe, it's a sure thing. Like just as sure as you jump on the 15 and head south, eventually, like sometime in the next 3 days, you will hit LA, right? On Sunday afternoon, it's a bad idea. But eventually, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It's a confident expectation it will happen. We can have that kind of hope that Jesus has gone ahead of us and he's planned for good. 2 or 3 women experienced this in on Easter morning, the very first one. In Mark chapter 16, we get a little window, but let me just tell you where we are in the story. On Thursday, Jesus is arrested. On Friday, he hangs on a cross from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and he does, in fact, die. Like he finds his way to the very end, enduring all of that on our behalf. He literally was taken down from the cross and carried to a brand new tomb that these women, some of them had actually traveled to and seen him placed in this tomb, and a large stone had been rolled in front of it. All of this happened kind of in a little bit of a hurry on Friday afternoon, because Friday sundown would begin the Sabbath for the Jewish people in the first century, and what they were to observe the Sabbath, and particularly it was Passover, is a really important time. So they had to get things finished up before sundown. So from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, the Jewish people did no work in honor of God, been doing that for centuries. But then Saturday evening, these women, they go and they purchase some things to go honor Jesus. I forgot to include verse 1 on the screen, but here it is. It says, Saturday evening when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out and purchased burial spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. This is a way of showing honor and respect to someone who has been lost. We read the story from resurrection, but they were living the story in real time, and to them, it was just Saturday night, and their friend, the most impactful person they had ever encountered, Jesus, was dead and buried, and what you do with someone who's dead and buried is you anoint and honor them. This is what they decided to do. We'll pick it up in verse 2. So then very early on Sunday morning, they couldn't go in the dark Saturday night, very early on Sunday morning, they went to anoint Jesus' body. Just at sunrise, they went to the tomb, and on the way, they were asking each other, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? But as they arrived, they looked up and they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already, tell somebody already, had already been rolled away. When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in white robes sitting on the right side. The women were shocked, but the angel said, don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Look, this is where they laid his body. Now, go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead. Tell somebody going ahead. He's going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you before he died. The women fled the tomb, trembling and bewildered, and they said nothing to anyone because they were too frightened. Now, we know from other accounts that they would eventually begin speaking. This is actually probably the most accurate ending of the Gospel of Mark. If you're looking at a Bible, you'll see it goes on. Those parts were probably added later on, one of the very few places that happened. This cliffhanger moment where he just kind of leaves things hanging, we'll get to it in a minute. But in this vein of Jesus being way ahead of us, we see it all over this story, and honestly, you see it all across Jesus' life. But I want to point at just a few places. These women were on the way to the tomb when it occurred to them, there are problems ahead of us. They were doing what they knew to do with someone that they loved and they missed. They were going to honor one who had affected their lives. We do the same with those who have honored our lives, and they expected to find him where they left him. That's generally how it works when people pass away, but not today. On the way, they're grieving, they're walking, they're worrying. They had problems ahead of them that they knew about, like the stone. They're like, I don't know how we're gonna roll this giant stone uphill out of the way to do what we're planning to do. They had problems ahead of them they knew about. Anybody in your life have problems ahead of you that you know about? Anybody? Like you entered into a situation, you're like, this is gonna be tough, this is gonna be tough, this is gonna be tough, not sure what we're gonna do about it. They had those kind of problems. They also had problems they didn't know about. In one of the other 4 accounts of Jesus' life, we know that there was a seal placed on this tomb so that anyone who would mess with it, it would be obvious, and that the leaders had posted a guard around the tomb so no one could mess with it. There were problems ahead of these ladies that they didn't know about. Anybody ever find problems ahead of you that you weren't expecting? Can I get a uh-huh? Listen, this is our world. But just like these women, Jesus has already gone ahead of us as well. By the time they find their way to the tomb, not only is the seal and the guard dealt with, but so is the stone, and a messenger prepared for them to help them understand what's ahead. They didn't see it coming. They didn't have it planned, but Jesus had everything in mind. He was playing chess when they were playing checkers, and he caught them up immediately into what he was doing. This is what Jesus is like. He's not ahead impatient. He's ahead planning for our good. Like parents with young kids on vacation. I remember one time we headed off to Disney World with our 2 young kids way back in the day, the Florida one, not the California one. And we got to the parking garage. And you know what's amazing to like 3 and 5-year-olds is elevator buttons. We got in the elevator and one of them pushed the button and one of them didn't get to. One of them had lived the Disneyland dream, Disney World dream, and one of them was crushed because they thought this elevator was Disney World. And we're like, you don't even know what's ahead of you. This is what Jesus is like. These women had anticipated a certain thing. He had so much more in mind. After a simple look into the tomb where they knew Jesus had been laid and seen that he was not there, they were caught up by this messenger. He gives them a mission. They were invited into the story, caught up in what Jesus was doing. Jesus didn't show up just to fix their lives. He showed up to invite them into what he was doing. You see, the people at the time had thought that he was coming to rescue Jewish people from Roman domination, and Jesus is like, that is not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is to rescue all of humanity from being wrecked by the effects of sin. He was up to so much more, and he was going to invite them into the story. They would become the first messengers of the best message ever, that the grave is not the final say, that death does not have its way. There is someone stronger than even our greatest enemy. And so they get to be the ones, and so they are caught up in the story, and they say, the angel tells them, go and tell. Tell somebody around you, go and tell. This is what Easter is about. Now, here's what I want to say, is that all of us have a story to tell in our lives of God's work. You would not be sitting here, even if you don't acknowledge Jesus, even if you don't acknowledge God. Something has been lining up in your world that you would be sitting in this place with these people on this day. He placed you in that family or with that coworker. You live next to those people or were born into this family. There is something that God has already gone ahead of you and is inviting you into his direction, that he has good in mind for you, that he's kind of paved a way. Now, you don't have to participate in that or acknowledge that, but this is how we see this in light of Jesus, that he has gone ahead of us. For all of us who are followers of Jesus, we know this. We know that we have a story to tell. We don't have all the answers. We don't know all the answers to everyone's question. Can we just agree that that's true? You could come up with 25 questions we don't know the answer to. But I'll tell you this, there's some things we know. There was a time in our life without Jesus, and it was real challenging, and Jesus did something remarkable in our lives, and he's turning our life right side up. 100% we see that over and over in our lives. In the same way, these women, they didn't know everything. They didn't know where Jesus had went. They didn't know what it meant. They didn't know all the things that were ahead of them, but they knew one thing. The one that they loved and who had changed their lives was no longer dead, was no longer in the grave, and they had one thing to do. They were going to go and tell. They didn't go with what they didn't know. They went with what they knew. Followers of Jesus, I just want to encourage you to do the exact same thing today. To tell the stories over and over and over of the time where Jesus did the thing that was to your good that you never saw coming. Where all roads seemed to come to an abrupt halt and you didn't see a way forward, and he showed up in the most powerful way and what it's been like since. Easter is a day for telling stories, because the resurrection is not just a one-time event. The resurrection was a picture and the power needed to write resurrection stories in our lives over and over and over. That he wasn't just going to turn one part of our lives right side up. He was going to turn all of it right side up. And so we tell the story again and again and again. Around here we have this picture that we show all the time, and this is why. It just reminds us to tell the stories and how we tell them. This is a less than sign. There was a time in our life where things had come to a challenging moment and we weren't sure what to do next. And then Jesus showed up and brought change in all the best way. We remember this the first time we acknowledge Jesus, but we also remember it every step along the way. That when we embrace what he is doing and we cling to him, remembering that if he can conquer the grave, he can carry us through what we're facing today, then he writes a greater than story, right? I'm a math geek. That's a greater than. Alligator eats the bigger number. You remember, right? There was a time when things were less than, and then Jesus, and now it's greater than. We asked, do you have a story like that? These women had stories like that. There was a time in their life that they thought the time that they shared with Jesus was completely over because death is the end, right? Nope. Jesus wrote a fresh story, and now they were on a new mission with a great kind of hope. There was a time in their lives when they were walking on the way to the grave, full of tears, not sure how to move a rock. Then they arrived, and Jesus had paved the way because he's always way ahead of us. And now they're caught up into a better story. Do you have a story like that? This is what we do, followers of Jesus, on Easter. We tell the stories. Not because we just have one, we have tons of them. Each time Jesus shows up in our life, he writes a better story, and we hold on to that story. And then what Jesus does so faithfully and patiently, like a loving parent carrying us along, all of us kids, he writes a new story, another part of our lives. We were living less than, settling for less than he desired. Jesus shows up, writes a fresh story, and we have another story to tell. Then he does it again, then he does it again, then he does it again. And here's what I want to say. On Easter, followers of Jesus tell the stories over and over and over. If you're not yet a follower of Jesus, consider, what's the story God might be writing in your life right now? How has Jesus, even in just these few moments today, shown up in a meaningful way in your world? I mean, this is kind of what Easter's like at my house anyway. Have you had those moments where you get together with longtime friends or family members and you sit down over a really great meal? What inevitably happens? You start telling stories. And if you're like me with longtime friends who I haven't seen for a minute, we tell the exact same stories every single time. Is anybody with me? Every single time. The same, they get a little better every time. We don't let the truth mess up a good story. You know what I'm saying? Gets a little better every time. But we tell the stories. Why do we do that? Because we're handing someone information that they don't have? No, that's not why. Because someone didn't know? Maybe. I mean, we're inviting someone into the circle that hadn't been there before. Really what we're doing is we're just rehearsing the relationship that we love with our friends and our family. Those moments that made us who we are together. We sit across the table, and these are circling in our minds anyway as we pass one dish after another. We start telling the stories, laughing just a little deeper each time, being just a little more grateful. This is what Easter is about, telling the story. So I want you to consider, especially those of you who have invited Jesus to do things in your life, what change has come into your life because of Jesus? Make a list and tell all the stories all day long. Some of you may not be following Jesus, and let me just say, some stories are coming your way. Have some grace. Jesus has gone ahead of us, and we are just so stoked. For any of you who are followers of Jesus, here's what you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, here's what you need to know. He's just the best. He's the best. And we're stoked about what he does in our life, and we just believe he does it in everybody's life in a unique and personal way. And so we talk about it a lot, and I understand that might get really annoying to some of you after a time. We're not trying to control outcomes. We're not trying to tell you who to become. We just long for you to experience what we've experienced. And so if you are one of those followers of Jesus, sharing your stories with people who might be far from God at this point in their life, just be at ease. God's already gone ahead of you. He didn't tell us to control outcomes or tell people what to believe or convince people. He tells us what he told these women. He just says, go and tell. Tell somebody around you, go and tell. That's what we're gonna do. Listen, don't settle. If you are curious about Jesus, don't settle just for the stories of your friends. Because in the story of Jesus, we actually find ourselves just like these women caught up in what he's doing. It's when we start to look at Jesus himself that things actually start to change in our lives. You know, listen, I can tell you all about my best friend, and that's really, really great. But there's a Grand Canyon difference between me telling you about them and you meeting them. And we want to be a people around here who are always just encountering Jesus himself. The good news of Easter is he's not dead. He's fully alive. He's present. We come to know him in his word, but he meets us personally because he is alive. In fact, this is one of the promises that's made right there in Mark chapter 16. You will see him just as he told you. The whole tenor of the scripture is God saying, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. I'll make a way for you to be with me. Will you be with me? I would love for you to experience being with me, God says. I would love for me to be able to call you alive in all the best ways. We could be together in all the struggle, all the success, all the hardship, all the things. I will be with you. Will you be with me? This is the invitation. And the promise over and over in the scripture is that if you go looking for Jesus, you'll find him. Jeremiah 29 says, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with your whole heart. Jesus said it this way, whoever has ears, let him hear. James said it this way, if you'll draw near to God, he'll draw near to you. I'm just telling you, these women came and saw the tomb, and then they ran and told, and the guys, they didn't believe the ladies. Can I just get a groan from all the ladies in the house? But they went and saw for themselves, and they found themselves caught up in the story as well. Jesus was way ahead of them, and whether you're a believer or not, Jesus is way ahead of you too. And when you look for him, you will find him. He's so strong that he can be 10 steps ahead and right with us exactly where we are. When we look in his direction, he meets us right here and walks us into all the best he has in mind for us. He did the same with these folks. In fact, when when the messenger tells these women, go tell the guys to meet me in Galilee, he had already laid that plan well before. We're talking about Sunday morning, but Thursday evening when he's having an epic dinner with his closest friends before he gave his life, this is what he said in Mark chapter 14, verse 27. It says, as they walked from dinner to the Garden of Gethsemane on the way, Jesus told them, all of you will desert me. For the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. Almost all of Jesus' friends and followers scattered like my kids at chore time. Like they were just gone, just disappeared. Jesus knew this would happen, which isn't just amazing that Jesus knew ahead of time because he's always way ahead of us. Can somebody say way ahead? He's not offended when we mess it up. He's not even surprised. He knew they were going to scatter. Didn't seem to bother him. I just want to tell you, if you showed up here and you were concerned about lightning striking you on the way in, you're like, listen, I don't know if this is going to be, this place will be okay when I walk in. Here's what you need to hear. God is not offended by your humanity. He's a loving Father who has grace and patience to meet us where we are as we are. He knew, he saw, he's not surprised, he's not even disappointed. He longs for you to experience his help wherever you find yourself. The same was true for these guys who, like I said, wouldn't even believe the women when they showed up. But Jesus, the night before he gave his life, said this, after I am raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee, and I'll meet you there. Not bothered when we have run, but longing for us to meet with him again. Maybe that's exactly what this Easter is about for you. After a long time, coming for him again, watching and looking, giving your attention to Jesus again, to look in his direction. Jesus is always where he says he'll be. He's available to everyone who is curious and responsive. He will catch all of us up into what he's doing. In fact, these closest friends and followers, Peter, James, and John, you probably could have named them, even if you don't read your Bible or know who Jesus is, no problem. Even these guys who are like heroes today were non-believers in the middle of the day on Sunday. It wasn't until later when he caught them up in what he was doing, the same can happen for you. There is space for everyone who wants to come and see. So as great as it is to hear the stories of people who know Jesus, there's nothing like looking right at him. So I want to invite all of us as a church, we're going to do this for the next several weeks. We're going to look right at the life of Jesus. If you have a curiosity about him, if you've been on the fence or people around you really love Jesus and you can't figure out why, we're going to spend some time looking right at the life of Jesus through the eyes of his best friend, John, for the next several weeks. So here's what I want to encourage you to do. Grab your phone right quick. I want to encourage you to send a text, okay? Super simple. Here's what's going to happen. If you send this text, we're going to send Devine. I don't know why it's dive in, all right? These are the jokes. Come along for the journey. Dive in to 94000. Just send that simple text. You can always bail out of the text thread if you want. But all it does is sign you up for a simple reminder. We're going to read through the life of Jesus. Some of you have only looked at the politicians who claim to know Jesus. Some of you have only experienced the most judgmental, critical, self-righteous people who try to bear his name. Have you ever looked right at Jesus? If you haven't, there's any curiosity, just put yourself to a decision. Look at what he's like. We're going to do that for the next several weekends, and this is going to give you simple reminders to look right at the life of Jesus alongside some other people and on your own each day. Right? So jump into the text thread, dive into 94000, and we'll do this together. Whether you're a storyteller or you're living in the middle of a story right now, finding your way in the direction of Jesus, I just want to say Jesus is way ahead of you. Somebody say way ahead. In the book of Mark, which is the one that we've read, it's one of the accounts of Jesus' life. Probably the main witness was Mark's friend Peter. He leaves us in this cliffhanger where these women go and there's an empty tomb and they're sent off running in a direction, not ready to speak to their friends, but they're just running, and it's like the story ends. It's like, wait, what? What? Have you ever watched a movie with a cliffhanger? Man, I love cliffhangers when I'm watching TV. Sometimes, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Megamind. It's just a really classic, funny cartoon I watch with my kids. The movie begins with a cliffhanger. The main character falling through the sky telling the story of that day. And you're like, what led to this? And then it backs up and tells you the story leading to that moment and eventually moves forward. Mark essentially does the same thing, and that's why we're going to look at Jesus for the next several weeks. Some of you are seeing the cliffhanger moment, but you don't understand the meaning yet. All of us are going to go back and look again at the story leading up to this moment. Cliffhangers are a pretty powerful tool to invite an audience in and invite like crazy, crazy anticipation. In fact, cliffhangers are really fun for an audience. You know who cliffhangers are not fun for? The characters, the ones who are actually hanging off the cliff. And before we wrap up our time, I just want to acknowledge some of you, maybe all of us are that person right now. Many of us have found ourselves in really challenging scenarios in our life leading up to this moment, and Jesus has met us, and that's why we call ourselves Christians. But we still find ourselves over and over in moments of life we're not sure how they're going to turn out, hanging on the edge. Others don't yet know what it is to trust Jesus or haven't reached out for him yet, and so maybe you're still in a moment hanging on the edge trying to figure out what's next. I remember this moment. We've got 4 kids. They're all teenagers now, but when they were young, we had just moved to Vegas about a decade ago, and here's how it happened. A neighbor shows up at our front door and rings the doorbell in a bit of a hurry. My wife with a newborn, I'm not home at the time, and my wife with a newborn taking care of him shows up at the front door, and the neighbor says, "Your child's legs are hanging off the edge of the roof." Yeah, that's a moment, right? Here's how the story unfolded. The 3 kids were upstairs in one of the kids' bedrooms playing together, and somehow they managed to unlock the window, slide the window open. There was a screen, so it felt safe to a toddler. My 2-year-old son climbs up into the gap of the window, and somewhere along the line, someone bumps or gives a little nudge to that kid, and that screen gives way. And out he went onto 6 feet of tiles sloped toward nothing but concrete or a car in the driveway. How much you love a cliffhanger right now? There's something about feeling the moment of, how is this going to end? And in those moments, we long for resolution, for peace, for clarity. Who can we reach to? Who can reach out? Y'all are still wondering about my son, aren't you? 2-year-old grappled his way back in, and by the time my neighbor and wife arrived in the room, everyone was in the room, safe, and everything was locked immediately. He's good. But listen, a lot of us are living stories right now that don't have resolution. They're in the middle. This is the thing about a cliffhanger, and Easter reminds us that even in the middle of the tension, as a follower of Jesus, it can be hard to not know how things are going to go. To not know what the diagnosis is going to be, where the money's going to come from, why the job got lost, why we can't have that person in our lives anymore. Will our kids find the thing that we long for them to have? We live in the middle of these things all the time. The hope of Easter is not that those cliffhanger moments disappear from our lives, but instead we have one who clings to us and we to him, and he walks us forward. And so followers of Jesus, let me tell you again, tell the stories again and again. Because your friends are in the middle of a story, and they need to remember we have an author who writes the best stories. And while they're in the middle of the tension, they can count on him that Jesus is way ahead of them. He's got them. There's good in mind. It may not be what we hoped. It may not be how we like, but he will meet us and he will carry us through. You got to tell the stories. You got to go and tell. Tell somebody, go and tell. Go and tell. Go and tell. Go and tell. Because with Jesus, what looks like the end of the story isn't the end of the story. The hope of the resurrection is he'll write that story over and over and over and over and over and over and over in our lives. He'll rescue us from every cliff all along the way. He'll carry us through, and one day he'll return and he'll make everything right. There won't be any more cliffs. There won't be any more cancer, any more depression, any more hunger, any more loneliness, any more death, any more tears. We'll be with him in every way. Everyone who clings to him in this life, because of what Jesus did on the cross, everyone who clings to him in this life will have him forever. C.S. Lewis says it this way, that in the end, everyone gets what they want. Everyone who wanted Jesus in this life will have him forever. And everyone who didn't want Jesus in life will not have him forever. And so some of you are hanging on a cliff and you have not reached for Jesus. And I just want to tell you, he can conquer the grave. He can carry you through what you have right now. And there is nothing you need to do. There is nothing you need to earn. You have nothing to hide, and you have nothing to prove. He is not offended by your humanity. He longs to scoop you up and rescue you better than any neighbor or mom ever could. He will meet you in this moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, and he will carry you forward forever because he can and he wants to. And so if on no other day, yeah, we can celebrate that. And so in a cliffhanger, we always want to know what happens next. Spoiler alert, it has everything to do with God writing one resurrection story in your life after another. And so on Easter, we celebrate. And for any who haven't yet, I encourage you, today's the day to say yes to Jesus and cling to him. The people you came along with can help you find your way. The people at Info Center can help you find your way. We're going to celebrate baptisms with a bunch of people today. There are people out there that will help you find your way without any pressure, without any coercion or anything else. We're just going to help you see Jesus and decide what to do with him. You can say yes to him today. So let's be people who tell the story over and over. Let's celebrate Easter and honor Jesus by talking about all the great stories he's written in our lives and sharing the stories that are in the middle where we need Jesus and count on him to be way ahead of us. And for everyone looking in his direction, wondering what life with him might be like, I encourage you, jump into the study as we look in weeks ahead at the life of Jesus in the Gospel of John. We're so glad you joined us. If there's any other way we can support you, we'd love to. Head over to canyonridge.org where you'll find everything you need to know along with a way to get in touch with us. If this was helpful to you, I encourage you, pass it on, share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you soon.